Hello, welcome to my channel. My name is Troy, and today I am going to be talking about why, of the Gen 5 games, Pokémon Black and Pokémon White, Pokémon White is strictly the better choice. It isn't really even a contest. White is just outright better. Now, typically in Pokémon, which version of the game you should choose should be based entirely on personal preference. Should you play Fire Red or Leaf Green? Well, do you prefer Arcanine or Ninetales? Should you play Heart Gold or Soul Silver? Well, did you watch the Lugia movie? Of course, there are notable exceptions. If you want to play a Gen 3 Hoenn game or a Gen 4 Sinnoh game, the general consensus is Emerald and Platinum, respectively. The third versions for a generation tend to have some pros that outweigh the predecessors. But Gen 5's Unova never got third versions. We have Pokémon Black and White, followed by Pokémon Black 2 and White 2. And White 2 are strictly better. Now, first let's look at the originals. Let's focus on those first. The classic difference between games is to look at version exclusives. Now, of course, which version exclusives are better is down to personal preference. Prior to the post-game, Black gets Whimsicott, Gothitelle, and Mandibuzz. Meanwhile, White gets Lilligant, Reuniclus, and Braviary. Now, personally, I think that this is a bit of a mixed bag on both fronts. I prefer Reuniclus and Braviary over Gothitelle and Mandibuzz, but I prefer Whimsicott over Lilligant, so that's something for both of them. But then my preference for Whimsicott didn't come from when it was in Pokémon Black. It has come more recently when Whimsicott got the Fairy type. Now, as well as this, I also think that Braviary makes more sense, like thematically, considering the American theming of Unova. But generally still a mixed bag. I think all of this is a matter of opinion. There is also the matter of legendaries, where Black has Reshiram and Tornadus, whereas White has Zekrom and Thundurus. But before we get to talking about the legendaries, let's talk about the post-game exclusives. In the post-game, Black gives you Beedrill, Houndoom, Breloom, Plusle, Volbeat, and Honchkrow, which is a solid line of Pokemon. I like all of those, at least to some extent. Then there's Volbeat. But then Pokemon White, on the other hand, has Butterfree, Parasect, Mightyena, Minun, Illumise, and Mismagius, and Pidgeot, and Nidoqueen and Nidoking, and Vileplume and Blossom, Alakazam, Machamp, Victreebel, Magnezone, Gengar, Rhyperior, Porygon Z, Togekiss, Ampharos, Jumpluff, Electivire, Magmar, Dustox, Beautifly, Ludicolo, Shiftry, Gardevoir, Gallade, Masquerain, Slacking, Exploud, Azumarill, Aggron, Flygon, Crawdon, Salamence, Staraptor, Luxray, Roserade, and Blissey. For reference, that is 6 version exclusives in Black's post-game, and 41 in White's post-game. And to make up for these 35 Pokemon that you're missing out on in Pokemon Black, Black has a few trainer battles that you can't do until you've already beaten the champion, and don't really have much need for experience or money that you get from trainer battles anymore. It is not very valuable. So, in terms of version exclusives, unless you happen to be the biggest Vullaby fan, White is the better answer. But maybe you're one of the many, many people who, when it comes to version exclusives, all you really notice is the legendary. Specifically, of course, the box legendary. Now, personally, I have always preferred Zekrom over Reshiram. The whole electric dragon theming it's just so much more unique to me. And the black as night body contrasted with the bright blue electricity, it's just... Zekrom looks awesome. I love it. But that is, of course, a matter of opinion. I know a lot of people who do prefer how Zekrom looks. But the one thing that you can't deny is that Zekrom is better competitively. Just for the sake of having outright facts to put behind him. Zekrom is in the Ubers in the modern days metagame of sorts, whereas Reshiram is in Uber's UU, which is the underused Ubers. So Zekrom strictly gets more usage. And there are reasons for this. Reshiram has more 4x resistances. I believe Reshiram has 2, Zekrom only has the 1. But Zekrom has a total of 5 regular resistances, whereas Reshiram only has 3. So in total, that is 6 types that you can safely switch Zekrom in on, and only 5 that you can for Reshiram. Reshiram does have 1 less weakness than Zekrom as well, thanks to its fire typing covering those nasty ice and fairy weaknesses. But fairy type attackers obviously didn't exist back in Gen 5, and ice type attackers have only really become common recently. The only good option for an ice type attacker until very recently was the likes of Weavile. And then, of course, Scarlet and Violet changed the ice type up a bit and gave us Chien Pao and other things. So the ice resistance, well, it isn't a resistance, but not being weak to ice is useful. But generally, Zekrom gets a lot more useful resistances. Reshiram's 4x resistances are resistances to grass, which there really aren't many common grass moves that are really dangerous in terms of damage. And then there is its 4x resistance to fire. Neither of these are very useful. Compare that to the 1 4x resistance that Zekrom has, and that's a resistance to electric, which is very useful, like very. There are powerful electric moves like if there's rain set up, you can expect thunders to be thrown around like mad. Almost any electric type attacker will have Thunderbolt or Thunder on it at some point. Volt Switch is a very common move. That much of a resistance to electric is very useful. And then Reshiram's other resistances, you know, they just don't come in handy as often. It also loses its resistance to water that it gets from being dragon by being, fire type. And, Zekrom's biggest weakness is the fact that it's weak to ground, but then so is Reshiram. They share the biggest weakness, but then Reshiram has a couple other big holes it needs to patch. That's generally like the gist of its issues. But then there is more to it than that. Like Reshiram can hit, it can hit a few types for super effective stab that Zekrom can't. But the types that it can hit are really useless, weak types, famously weak types like Bug and Ice and Grass. Sure, you can get a scary Amoonguss off the field a bit quicker with a Reshiram than you can with a Zekrom. But once the opponent starts sending in their sweepers, you're not going to have much luck. Whereas Zekrom's electric typing lets it hit, say, a powerful, bulky water Pokemon, or a fast, dangerous flying type. There's more to Zekrom's typing than there is for Reshiram. But Zekrom's biggest draw, competitively, is that it's a physical attacker, to put it simply. This does mean that, unlike Reshiram, it's susceptible to the likes of Intimidate, but it also means that it can make use of one of the most dangerous setup moves in Pokemon in general, not just competitive. It's a move that Nuzlockers shake in fear at. It's a move that even casual players have probably been swept by during a regular playthrough of Emerald at some point. Because since Generation 8, Zekrom has had Dragon Dance. It uses Dragon Dance, and now it outspeeds most of the game, and hits hard enough to one-shot most things. And I don't believe, other than, depending on how Electric interacts with Steel, I'm not sure, but I don't believe there's any type that resists both Dragon and Electric. So generally, you can expect a lot of good from a powerful Dragon Dancing Zekrom. But of course, with the version exclusives, I went back to talking about how, we can't really count Whimsicott for being fairy because it wasn't fairy back in Gen 5. So let's give the same credit here, because Zekrom didn't have Dragon Dance back in Gen 5. But what it did have was it was immune to paralysis, which is far more useful than Reshiram being immune to burn, because Regiram's a special attacker. It doesn't care much about being burnt. But Zekrom being immune to paralysis means that it can't get the random stops and it can't get the half its speed cut. Paralysis is generally a lot more scary than a burn, and it can completely cripple your team. Zekrom also can inflict paralysis with a lot of its moves, including its signature moves, whereas Reshiram can only really inflict burn, which only really helps if you're already on the back foot a bit. Zekrom is also capable of learning Volt Switch, which can be a complete tempo shift in your favor if you need it. And Zekrom gets a wider variety of coverage moves too. Generally, Zekrom just has a lot more going for it than Reshiram. And it also has better physical defense rather than Reshiram's special defense. With that, it's a lot more useful because, both of them are fearing, say, a super effective Earthquake or an Icicle Crash. Well, no, I guess Reshiram's not so much fearing an Icicle Crash, but most of what they're fearing is physical moves. Zekrom has a better time tanking those physical moves than Reshiram does. But anyway, that's a competitive standpoint looking at the legendaries. Rather than focusing on competitive, let's take a look at the themes and lore behind things, the story, the storytelling, because that's what I love about Pokemon. Even in the games that have had weaker stories, I love Pokemon's storytelling. And in my eyes, White simply holds a better story than Black. Because in Pokemon White, in both, you have this battle of truth versus ideals. Zekrom being ideals, and Reshiram being truth. In Pokemon White, N takes Reshiram. N takes the Dragon of Truth. And to me, there's something beautiful about that, because he was lied to and manipulated all his life. And then standing by his side is truth. Truth itself. And he doesn't see it. At first, at least, he doesn't see it. He believes that he is right. He believes he is acting out of truth, and he is not acting out of personal ideals. So it makes sense that he'd want Reshiram as well. And then, in the end, after finally battling alongside Reshiram, the Dragon of Truth, N finally realizes that he was lied to. He isn't buried in those lies anymore. He has fought alongside truth, and he's finally seen it. Truth is, to me, the most important part of N's journey, because he was suffocated by lies up until that point when he fought alongside the Dragon of Truth and realized that he had been lied to. That, to me, is beautiful, quite frankly. There is something beautiful about someone who was lied to and manipulated and used doing this. And then, of course, when it comes to Pokemon White 2, N and Reshiram come back after going on a long search for, N's only friend. N and Reshiram come back, and in your moment of need, when you're against this awful, manipulative liar, N comes back, and it doesn't exactly work out as hoped, but N, alongside the Dragon of Truth, help you take down this liar. And then the DNA splices thing goes on, but we're going to ignore that. That doesn't go any better in Black, so But even looking away from the big plot points, though, smaller details to me fit better in Pokemon White than they do in Pokemon Black. Let's look at Iris. In both games, you meet Iris early on, and she is helping deal with Team Plasma, and she's helping protect Bianca after Plasma attacked Bianca and stole her Pokemon. She then leaves to help Bianca train, setting up that Iris is some kind of trainer, and she must be powerful too. Next time you battle against Bianca, she is significantly stronger than last you fought her. Don't get me wrong, she still isn't very strong, she's still Bianca, but she's doing a lot better now. So that to me, that sets up that Iris must be a powerful trainer to have trained someone as weak as Bianca to be this much stronger. And then if you're playing Pokemon Black, you never actually battle Iris. This setup is just unimportant. The next time you see her properly is when, in the post game, she's stood in Drayden's house for some reason, offering to teach you Draco Meteor. She doesn't do anything else. There is no setup, like no payoff for the earlier setup. And then you get to Pokemon Black 2, and suddenly this nobody trainer who was just stood in a guy's house teaching a move before has become the new champion. This would be equivalent to, like, in Fire Red and Leaf Green, there are people who teach you Mega Punch and Mega Kick. Could you imagine if one of those was a named NPC, he showed up a little earlier in the game, and then he's the champion in Heart Gold Soul Silver? It'd come out of nowhere. And that is essentially the role that Iris has if you're playing Pokemon Black. But then, if you're playing Pokemon White, then when you reach Opelucid City, Drayden is still there. Drayden is the mayor of the city. He is in a position of power. He is still a busy man. But he doesn't run the gym. You know, he is a busy man. And in place of him running the gym, you see the person that he has been training. You see Iris, this girl that you've heard of before, you've seen before briefly, you've heard that she's powerful, and now she is the last challenge before you go on to Victory Road and the Elite Four. To me, that is a lot more impactful. And then you play White 2, and once again, you run into her earlier in the game. I believe there's a whole thing in the sewers, if I recall. But then, as you continue on, you get to Opelucid City, and Iris isn't the gym leader. The old retired gym leader from before is. And, you know, he puts up a good fight. It's, you know, you can see why he used to be a gym leader and why he's able to take the mantle back up now. But then you don't know where Iris is now. She's not here. And as you continue on, you get through the Elite Four, and you get to the champion, and there she is. It's Wallace all over again. The 8th gym leader has become the champion. And with this, you actually get to see her grow into that role. You get to see her fighting as a skilled trainer beforehand. Now, you could argue that this undermines Drayden and his role, because you never see him as the 8th gym leader, only as the 7th in White 2. But I'd have to disagree with that. So it is commonly known that in Black and White, Drayden is training Iris to be his successor either way. Just in Black, there isn't really any payoff for that. Drayden is the one in the gym, you know, he's the one the mentor is the one in the gym, and the person that he's trying to train to be a gym leader is the one who's mentoring you a move. That feels a bit backwards to me. Why is the teacher in the gym and the future gym leader teaching? And then, not only that, but she never becomes his successor, not even for a brief bit in Pokemon Black. Because next time you see her, she's the champion. She's a bit of a nobody, and then she just jumps up to being the champion all of a sudden. Now, in Pokemon White, Drayden still has a solid role. He's the mayor of Opelucid City. He shows up a couple times in the in the plot when things go through Opelucid, but you know, he's a mayor. He doesn't really venture out of there. But he has trained Iris. It's established that he is the one who taught Iris, hence why she is the one in the gym, because now he can focus on his duties as the mayor. And then in Black and White 2, specifically, of course, we're talking about White 2, Iris takes on the mantle of champion, and Drayden has to pick back up the mantle of the gym leader all over again after probably a little while off, which probably explains why in White 2 he's the 7th gym rather than the 8th gym. You know, he's rusty. Iris has been running the gym for a while. Whereas in Black 2, there's not really any excuse for why his Pokemon are suddenly a lower level than they were a game before. it's his Pokemon have actively de-leveled over the last 2 years. He is like, I'd argue that makes him the worst trainer ever if you're playing the Black and Black 2, because yeah, he's the only trainer I've seen since Lance to de-level his Pokemon between games. I also generally, just as a cool factor, I love the idea of an old retired gym leader picking up the mantle again and still being one of the best. I think it's a lot better than him just being the gym leader already and then getting worse by the next game. And then rather than talking about NPCs for the rest of the thematic bit, let's also mention the cities, because Opelucid City changes drastically depending on the game. And in either game, this old man, Drayden, is the mayor. But in Pokemon Black, this old man's city is neon blue buildings. Like, his gym is still a grand stone cathedral, which it just clashes massively with these neon lights and tarmac roads and these sleek, like, beyond modern houses. Just this grand ancient cathedral. And it's not like they didn't know it was out of place when designing this city, because it's walled off with construction signs from the rest of the city, you know? And then you'd think that by Black 2, because the whole point of this, the reason that it's these futuristic houses and all of that, is because the city's supposed to represent, like, immense progress. So you'd think that by Black 2, the construction would be done, and that, these construction signs around the gym would be gone, and the gym would maybe match the city a bit better. But no. 2 years later, in Black 2, the city looks identical. It has not progressed. It even still has the construction signs around their big cathedral gym. And then more construction signs set up over by one of the routes out of the city. So they've actually made negative progress in this city of progress. So, like, that feels a bit wrong. But then in Pokemon White, Opelucid City is old, stone buildings, very traditional, cobbled paths, and then once again the grand ancient cathedral as the gym. And it fits in this. It looks right. It doesn't look out of place. And then, with this city of tradition, it makes a bit more sense that it hasn't changed over the next 2 years. And Opelucid isn't even the only victim of this. I'm fairly neutral about the changes in Mr. Elton, because it's Pokemon White has little rural farms along the side at the end of the runway, and Black has greenhouses. That's not too bad to me. But then there's the worst offender. There is White Forest for Pokemon White, and Black City for Pokemon Black. Now, in the original, White Forest is a forest with, big overgrown trees. There's a couple houses in there. No, actually, there is a singular house in there, and a handful of trainers residing in the forest. This is also where Pokemon White gets all of those version exclusives from earlier, because it has a lot that Black just doesn't have here in this city, in the form of tall grass dotted around, that have a lot of older Pokemon in. And once you've got all of that, it makes for just a nice little forest, just a break for catching Pokemon, completing a bit more of your decks. And I like it. But then Pokemon Black, on the other hand, is a dense, claustrophobic city with none of the Pokemon encounters from before, none of the hidden items either. And personal opinion, none of the charm. It's just a city with a small handful of trainer battles that you probably won't really be using. It's undeniably useless. Then the forest and the city both change a bit by the sequels as well. In Black City, they demolish a couple of the houses that are in there. Sucks to be the people who lived in those. And they're gone to make room for an ugly, out-of-place tower called Black Tower. It is blue. Black Tower is blue. It is a battle facility, which, I like the battle facility, but it's ugly and it's not even black as advertised. It is a blue tower. And then functionally identical, but aesthetically very different, is White Tree Hollow in Pokemon White. Rather than demolishing people's houses to make room for an ugly tower, a tree has grown in the forest. That's typically where trees tend to be. And this huge tree is a naturally formed battle facility called White Tree Hollow. It does take the place of those 41 encounters from earlier. Well, 35, 6 are dotted through the rest of the game. But yeah, it does take the place of those 35 extra encounters from earlier, but, the cities are now functionally the same, but they're aesthetically very different. And I think the aesthetic for Pokemon White is just a lot better. Overall, to summarize, because we're getting close to the 40-minute mark, and I'm probably going to be the one editing this and making some kind of video for it, I think that Pokemon Black does very, very little better than Pokemon White. If you want a better variety of Pokemon, play Pokemon White. If you want a more cohesive story, White. You want better narrative symbology, White. You want more developed characters, White. You want better twists on the story, White. But hey, if you happen to be the world's #1 Vullaby fan, then Pokemon Black is the game for you. Thank you for watching, and like and subscribe if you like this video, please. This will be the first video that I'm editing myself, and really the first video that I actually put a lot of time and effort into. So I hope it does at least somewhat well. Thank you again, and goodbye.